Good afternoon. Welcome to the Mind of STEM, where I am your host, Leon Jones. And today we're going to talk about anatomy and physiology. And I'm just going to give you a brief overview of what anatomy and physiology is. Now, what you need to understand is that anatomy is part of biology. It's a life science. Now, when you deal with life sciences, you deal with entomology, botany, physiology. You deal with everything that deals with life. Now, when you deal with physical sciences, and I did a video last week on that, you deal with the chemistry, the physics, the earth science, the meteorology, and astronomy. But this afternoon, I'm going to give you a brief overview of anatomy and physiology. And it is very important that you understand anatomy and physiology because a lot of us, although we don't go into the health field, don't understand what our body is made of and what it can really do. Now, when we deal with anatomy, we're basically dealing with the study of the structure and relationship between body parts. And I'm talking about your bones, your muscles, your exoskeletal structure. And when we deal with physiology, we deal with the function of the body parts. Now, there are some specializations within anatomy and physiology. You have what we call gross anatomy, which is basically the study of body parts to the naked eye, such as the heart and bones. Now, just as I told you before, the bones are part of your skeletal structure. Then you have histology. That's basically the study of tissues at the microscopic level. Now, when I talk about tissues, I'm simply talking about your muscles. Then you have cytology or cytology, which that is the study of cells at the microscopic level. Then neurophysiology is the study of how the nervous system functions. Now, you also have organizations of living systems, and this is where you get into the biology part of anatomy and physiology. So when we deal with living systems, they could basically be defined as various perspectives from the broad, and I'm talking about looking at the entire earth to the minute. And when I talk about the minute, I'm basically talking about individual atoms. Now, each perspective provides information about how and why a living system functions. Now, understand this. At the chemical level, atoms or molecules or combinations of atoms and the chemical bonds between atoms provide the framework upon which all living activity is based. Now, understand this, that the cell is the smallest unit of life. Now, the organelles within the cell are specialized bodies performing specific cellular functions. Now, cells themselves may be specialized. Thus, there are nerve cells, bone cells, and even muscle cells. Now, when we deal with muscles, again, we talk about tissues. Now, a tissue is a group of similar cells performing a common function. Muscle tissue, for example, consists of muscle cells. Now, an organ is a group of different kinds of tissues working together to perform a particular activity. The heart is an organ composed of muscle, nervous, connective, and epithelial tissues. Now, remember, within an organ, there's a system. It's called an organ system. It's basically two or more organs working together to accomplish a particular task. Now, the digestive system, for example, involves the coordinated activities of many organs, including the mouth, stomach, and large intestines, pancreas, and liver. Now, remember this. An organism is a system possessing the characteristics of living things, and it's the ability to obtain and possess energy, the ability to respond to environmental changes, and the ability to produce. Now, you have homeostasis. Homeostasis. Now, a characteristic of all living systems is homeostasis, or the maintenance of stable internal conditions within limits. Now, in many cases, stable conditions are maintained by negative feedback. Now, in negative feedback, a sensing mechanism, a receptor detects a change in conditions beyond specific limits. Now, I'm talking about a central center or a integrator, which is known as the brain, that evaluates the change and activates a second mechanism or effector to correct the condition. Now, example, cells that either remove or add glucose to the blood in an effort to maintain homeostasis are effectors. Now, conditions are constantly monitored by receptors and evaluated by the control center. Now, when the control center determines the conditions have returned to normal, corrective action is therefore discontinued. Thus, in negative feedback, the variant condition is canceled or negated, so the conditions are returned to normal. Now, the regulation of glucose concentration in the blood basically illustrates that the homeostasis is maintained by negative feedback. So, after a meal, the absorption or of glucose, and glucose is sugar. So sugar from the digestive tract, and what that does, it increases the amount of glucose in the blood. Again, glucose is sugar. So in response, specialized cells in the pancreas, known as alpha cells, secrete the hormone insulin, which circulates through the blood and stimulates the liver and muscle cells to absorb the glucose. Now, when we talk about glucose and sugar, well, if your pancreas and your sugar level goes up, your glucose isn't working right, this is when you get diabetes. Because once blood glucose levels return to normal, insulin secretion stops. So if you have a problem with your insulin, this is when you are injected with insulin to allow your blood sugar levels to level off. Now, later, perhaps after any heavy exercise, the blood glucose levels may drop because muscle cells absorb glucose from the blood and use it as a source of energy for muscle contraction. Now, this is why I was telling you that sugar can be good for you, because if you're doing exercise, you can burn up energy, and I'm talking about heavy exercise, because I walk 4 to 5 miles a day, and I've eaten 53 grams of sugar, and it didn't affect me. That's because my exercise is burning off all that sugar. Now, in response to falling glucose levels, another group of specialized pancreatic cells known as beta cells secrete a second hormone, glucagon. Now, glucagon basically stimulates the liver to release its stored glucose into the blood system. Now, when the blood glucose levels return to normal, glucagon secretion stops. Now, compare this with positive feedback, in which an action intensifies a condition so that it is driven further beyond the normal limits. Now, such positive feedback is uncommon but does occur during blood clotting. Now, childbirth, labor contractions, lactation, where milk production increases in response to an increase in nursing, and of course, sexual orgasms. Now, when it comes to anatomy and physiology, well, there's an anatomic terminology. Now, in order to accurately identify the areas of the body defined by anatomical terms, well, you have to understand what the terms mean and what the terms are. So that the terms refer to the body in an anatomical position, standing erect, facing forward, arms down to the side, with palms turned forward. Now, in this position, the following apply. Directional terms are used to describe the relative position of the body, or let's say the relative position of one body part to another. Now, the body planes and sections are used to describe how the body or an organ is divided into two parts. Now, sagittal planes divide a body or organ vertically into right and left parts. Now, if the right and left parts are equal, the plane is a mid-sagittal plane. If they're unequal, the plane is a parasagittal plane. Now, there's a frontal coronal plane, and that divides the body or organ vertically into front anterior and rear posterior parts. Now, you have the horizontal transverse plane, and that divides the body or organ horizontally into top superior and bottom inferior parts. This is also known as the cross section. Now, body cavities are enclosed areas that house organs. These cavities are basically organized into two groups. The posterior dorsal body cavity includes the cranial cavity, which, if you deal with cranial, you're dealing with the brain, and the vertebral cavity, and if you deal with anything dealing with the vertebrae, it's the spinal cord. Now, the anterior or ventral body cavity, including the thoracic or thoracic cavity, which contains all of your lungs, each in its own pleural cavity, and the heart in the pericardial cavity, and I call it the abdominal pelvic cavity, which contains the digestive organs in the abdominal cavity. Now, when we talk about anything abdominal, we're dealing with the stomach and the bladder and reproductive organs in the pelvic cavity. Now, regional terms identify specific areas in the body. In some cases, a descriptive word is used to identify the location. Now, for example, the actual region refers to the main axis of the body. I'm talking about the head, neck, and trunk. Now, the appendicular region refers to the appendages, and I'm talking about your arms and legs. Other regional terms use a body part to identify a particular region of the body. For example, the nasal region identifies this. It's your nose. So, if you want to know more about anatomy and physiology, I suggest you take a biology class. It's very interesting because remember something, the body is a chemical. A lot of us don't know what the body does. This is why I say we have to take care of our body. We have to keep our blood sugar down. We have to keep toxins out of our lungs. And this is why smoking is bad for you. But all in all, anatomy and physiology is basically the study of the body structure and how the body functions. And that's it for this video. Thank you for tuning in to the Mind of STEM. You can also catch my other channel, the 401 Talk Zone radio show channel. It's also on YouTube. You can also catch my Blog Talk radio show every weekend. I talk about different topics, some controversial, some not. Also, please comment, share, and subscribe to this channel. This is the only channel on YouTube where you are going to learn science, technology, engineering, and math. Just want to say thank you for listening. Have a good day. Once again, my name is Leon Jones, and I'm out.